I'm now joined by 4 Irish MEPs here in the studios just by the European Parliament chamber in Strasbourg. Marian Harkin is an independent MEP for the North West region. Brian Crowley is the Fianna Fáil MEP for the South region, and also representing the South, Sean Kelly from Fine Gael. And from the Dublin constituency we've got Labour's Francis de Rossa. Maybe Brian Crowley, I can start off with you, seeing as you represent the outgoing government. Do you think it's possible to substantially renegotiate the IMF EU deal?
Well, according to everybody who's involved in the EU-IMF deal, it's not possible to substantially renegotiate it. There are options and things that can be taken into account. Already the negotiations start with regard to the interest rate, but that's still only a very small part of the overall deal. And as recently as Monday night or Tuesday night, Ollie Rehn said that there would be no appetite for the burning of bondholders at a European level. Hopefully, and I say this with all desire for success, that whatever government comes in the future, we know the likely shape what that government will be, that we can all work together to try and get the best possible deal for Ireland. And
but you're saying really on the substantial parts, Brian Crowley, such as the interest rates, the bondholders, they're not going to tolerate any major renegotiation of those things.
Well, I think the one thing we'll find is that the senior bondholders will have a preferential placement, whereas the junior bondholders and others would have a lesser protected placement within the overall creditors who were exposed.
So there may be room for negotiation.
There may be, but the bottom line here is that we still, at some stage, will have to go back to the markets to borrow money. We're going back to the markets to borrow money from the same bondholders that we're now talking about burning.
But they're the ones, though, aren't they, who recklessly lent to...
We already see that at the moment, Portugal this week is paying 7.16% for its bonds on the market at the moment. That's nearly 2% greater than what the Irish rate of interest will be under this deal. And as I said, there's an opportunity that we can have that rate reduced. But the overall plan is that we have to fix to certain criteria that have to be met with regard to fiscal responsibility in Ireland, with regard to the recapitalisation of the banks and the closure of a lot of the banks, consolidation within the banking sector as well.
OK, Francis de Rossa from the Labour Party, no real negotiation there according to Brian Crowley.
Well, I think Brian is wrong because we have a formal statement from Commissioner Wren dated yesterday in response to a question put down by Nessa Childers, one of the Labour MEPs here, which is not the same as him sort of commenting to the newspapers, where he says the policy path set out in the programme is appropriate, but under certain circumstances the programme provides for reprioritisation of measures, and if circumstances change, a review of the programme takes place every quarter with the macro framework, and the financing needs are reassessed in light of new economic developments and progress made, etc.
Okay,
etc.
but I mean, you could interpret that anyway, though.
Well, the point is, you see, saying that there's no question of a renegotiation is a complete nonsense. Of course there's space for renegotiations. In this here, he makes clear, beyond 2011, no detail has been identified. Beyond this year, no detail has been identified. So it's very clear that negotiations will go on. Now, there are 4 areas where this deal needs to be renegotiated. There's the interest rate that is being charged, which is penal. It's done deliberately penal and decidedly so by the member state governments who are involved in the deal.
So interest rates is one.
Interest rates is one. We need a more growth-friendly fiscal consolidation. The fiscal consolidation that is required under this programme will not enable the Irish economy to grow. If the Irish economy doesn't grow, we cannot pay our debts. That's the simple, straightforward fact. So that's the second point. I think we also need new instruments. We need a new instrument for small countries, peripheral countries like Ireland, to raise money, Eurobonds or some similar mechanism to ensure that we can continue to draw with the protection of the rest of the European Union. And of course the bondholders have to take a cut. I mean,
when you talk about bondholders, what exactly are you talking about?
Let me make this point. We're not talking about governments here. We're talking about private We're talking about private investors.
Credit unions in Ireland.
Credit unions in Ireland. I thought they dismissed that.
Hold on,
They're actually angry to be
This is the old
associated with
cry
that.
from Fianna Fáil, credit unions from Ireland. Investors are not the same as bondholders. These are long-term bondholders, big professional bond-holding companies who put massive amounts of money into Irish banks to make a profit out of the property boom in Ireland.
Are you talking about banks here now? What kind of big bondholders are you talking about?
The banks went broke. We are now carrying the can because Fianna Fáil and the Greens gave a blanket guarantee for these debts.
Okay, but you came out with a figure during the week that you said that German banks lent about 140 billion to Irish banks.
There's absolutely no question, but the bondholders who took a risk have to pay for that risk. They cannot walk away scot-free and destroy the Irish economy in trying to pay debts that we shouldn't have to pay.
Who are these mystery bondholders? I mean, give an idea of who exactly they would be.
The bondholders are these people on Wall Street. There's many of them are in the United States. There are many of them in Europe. All these big companies like Goldman Sachs and so on who pumped money into the Irish banks. There are something in the region of 20 billion of these senior bond holders. But overall, something in the region of 500 billion euros was pumped into Irish banks over the years of the bubble. According to the Financial Times, up to the middle of last year, European banks were caught by Irish banks to the tune of 700 billion.
Okay, just before I go to you, Marion Harkin, Prunchi Strasbourg is saying it is possible to get these bondholders to share some of the debt for their reckless investment in bad property in terms of the Irish banks.
Well, I already said that some of the bondholders will suffer, that there will be a haircut on some of the bondholders, but you have to distinguish between the senior bondholders and the junior bondholders.
Have you got an amount of money as to what it would be?
So either we answer the question or we don't have any discussion. You also have to distinguish between sovereign debt and banking debt. And there are differences, and you can lump all the figures together and come up with 700 million or 700 billion being exposed through different things or whatever else. Part of the figures that the Financial Times put forward included Irish national debt that the Irish government had borrowed on the bond market, and that was included in the 700 billion. And as well as that, if you look back to Ollie Wren's answer to Nessa Childers in her question, he said about the macro element could be looked at under review if certain targets are met. So when we speak about a substantial renegotiation or divergence from what was already agreed, it's incorrect to say that you can substantially...
Okay, Marion Harkin, if you could come in here. We just let Marion Harkin in. Prunchi Strasbourg, let Marion Harkin.
Then that's a different
Okay, Marion Harkin.
When we talk about burning bondholders, I suppose there's two comments I'd like to make. Brian is talking about the difference between banking and sovereign debt. Unfortunately for us, banking debt has become sovereign debt, and that is the crux of the problem. But I mean, Angela Merkel herself said that after 2013, the bondholders will have to share the pain. So, I mean, that's the way Europe is going to go. All I suppose we're asking for is that it gets there just a little bit quicker. And I myself believe that that's what will happen. But to come back to your original question about changing the terms of the bailout, as early as last September, I spoke in the European Parliament before anybody was talking about this, and I spoke about the issue of growth and the fact that we just could not pay the terms of the agreement because there was no growth in the Irish economy. We see for the last 4 years our GNP, which is the real measure of growth, has decreased for the last 4 years. There is no way we can pay the debts that are on our shoulders at this moment in time. This is about...
So who then loses out, Marion Harkin? If we go back to renegotiate, is it Germany, then France, then Britain, that we're going to expect them to give us money on the one hand and then suffer on with the other hand?
Specific renegotiation. We're talking about the interest rate, for example. We know that we're being charged over 3% more of an interest rate than it costs the ECB to borrow it. So there's a huge margin there. And we know that in the new fund that's being set up, we have a temporary mechanism in place at the moment, but in the permanent fund that is being set up, the 500 billion, there will be, I believe, ample room for negotiation or renegotiation of the interest rates. Already the Dutch government have said that. Of course, as we would expect, the Portuguese, the Greek and the Spanish governments are supportive of this. So there will be room for renegotiation. But at the end of the day, Carl, it comes down to this. The level of debt that is on the shoulders of Irish citizens at this stage is simply unsustainable. We're sinking under it. That's no good for Europe, it's no good for Ireland. And as a French colleague of mine said to me very recently, and she said it genuinely, she said, if Ireland fails, Europe fails. And I think that in many ways is our strongest bargaining card.